Welcome to the Keynote podcast on speaking engagement. I'm your host, Ryan Catherwood. This week, our special guest is Mallory Willsea. Mallory is an award-winning creator with Enrollify. She is the co-host and founder of the Higher Ed Icons podcast. She is a consultant in the area of higher ed marketing and communications, and she is an overall outstanding professional in the space, and she's been doing it a long time. I first met Mallory back in 2011, 12, somewhere in that range. And all the way back then, her work with M. Stoner was really cutting edge in the higher ed marketing space. I began to follow Mallory first on Twitter, as she was a prolific tweeter, and then connect with her across social media platforms, following the M. Stoner team as they developed Ed Universe and then Higher Ed Live. And I began to host web shows back in those days called Higher Ed Live and a sub show called Advancement Live. So when I first began thinking about who would be the optimum guest for the Keynote podcast, Mallory was one of the first people I thought of. She's incredibly thoughtful. She has a pulse on where the field is at this time. She's a community builder, and she's someone that brings the digital world and the in-person world together in order to help drive this industry forward. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Mallory Willsea. I know I did. And if you are a subscriber on Speaking Engagement, I'd encourage you to become a member. Think about buying a membership for you or your colleagues or your entire organization. Speaking Engagement was designed in order to provide professional development for teams across higher education, particularly in the advancement or marketing space. Anybody who's interested in building communities, and that means everybody. So think about becoming a member and not just a subscriber, and then join us for our Agora live events beginning on May 26th. Our book club begins with The Generosity Crisis coming up in June. We've got so much to offer as part of the Speaking Engagement community. And of course, you don't have to just hear from me. You hear from our team of contributing editors for the Breakout podcast, as well as their amazing articles. So think about it. Go ahead and explore our site, speakingengagement.org. Think about becoming a member, and we'll look forward to having you part of our community moving forward. Okay, now for my interview with Mallory Willsea. All right, Mallory Willsea, thank you so much for being on the Keynote on Speaking Engagement. It is great to see you, my friend. It has been a long time. And when I was thinking about leaders in our field that do engagement and have been doing it forever, that has a ton of thoughts and would be really great to have on the podcast, I thought of you. So thank you for being here.
That's so nice, Ryan. And now I feel like I have a very high bar to live up to. So hopefully we hit it in this conversation.
I'm sure we will. You are a podcasting pro. Congrats on Higher Ed Icons.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a fun little venture.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that as we move forward. And you also have some other adventures, which I would love for you to share. But one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here at the onset of Speaking Engagement is actually when I think about my own journey in higher ed and the people that go all the way back to the beginning, someone I sort of think about as part of my own origin story. I think about you, I think about M. Stoner, and I think about Ed Universe, which was back in the day, there was a content hub you all created that you were crowdsourcing contributors to publish articles and share perspectives, and that morphed into a Higher Ed Live and Advancement Live and so many things. But I guess I wanted to, for those of folks who don't know you as well as I know you in terms of your bio, just share a little bit about your kind of crooked mile and talk about your work a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. And thank you. I mean, we were doing podcasts before podcasts were cool, huh?
Google Hangouts on Air. Remember that? Google Hangouts on Air. That was a thing.
There were 4 to 8 systems running at any given time just to make it so people could hear and see you. And yet here we are in like Riverside and we click 3 buttons and it's like
I
magic,
know.
right? So if only
Could have
this
used
had
it back
existed
then.
in 2010. Yeah. No, so I appreciate the intro question because, I think that I grew I'll start here. Like I grew up on a dairy and maple farm in upstate New York, and I'm literally wearing my upstate hat today. Like this is who I am at my core. And throughout my whole career, I have had this bias for practical things, unfussy solutions, right? I've chased innovation, but it's always been from this foundation of this girl who just like had to like milk a cow every now and then. And um so when I think about the luck that I have had along the way, working for my alma mater when social media happened and having a president who trusted a 22-year-old to figure it out for their institution, then going to M. Stoner and being handed this thing called Ed Universe, which was a community platform before anybody else was doing community platforms, right? We acquired Higher Ed Live from Seth Odell, a podcast before podcasts even existed. Like I've had so much luck in my life. But, I like to think that along the way, I have been able to evaluate these new and emerging tools and solutions from the foundation of, well, what's the actual goal here, right? The cow's got to get milked. So how do we go milk the cow? And it might not be the fanciest new tool all the time, but I have just had this thread of like find the thing that's going to most efficiently get the work done, and then just go do it.
Talk about you're obviously passionate for higher ed, for the education space, and I imagine you've had a series of roles along the way, but which one of your roles really shaped the Mallory of today?
Oh my gosh. I mean, if it wasn't my 10 years at M. Stoner, what was it? Like
Yeah,
I was in my early 20s through early 30s, like such a foundational point in anybody's career in life. You mentioned Higher Ed Icons. I had the pleasure of launching that podcast recently with Voltaire Santos Moran, who I worked for. He's one of the co-founders of M. Stoner. Our very
right.
first
And you
guest
had
was
Michael on, right?
That's right. Our very first guest was the one and only Michael
You
Stoner.
had
And
to,
at
full
the
circle.
at the end of that episode, I was actually like red-faced crying in tears because these two people were so foundational in how I operate as a professional. I learned how to treat people by watching how they treated people, by watching them do the thing for the client that might break the budget or cause them to work on a Sunday afternoon because it was the right thing for the client. The way that Voltaire remembers the small details about anyone he talks to, the way that Michael Stoner stops and thinks about the foundation and the goal before the tool, right? Like they influenced how I show up for the teams I lead. They influenced how I approach communicating and relationship building, and I'm so grateful that I had that incredible foundation at such a young age, and that they trusted me with like really big stuff. They let me fail, and I learned the value of failing fast by working for them.
It was clear at the time, going back a ways now, you had an eye for community building and engagement strategy. And I think we're doing some of the things today still that you all were pioneering back at that time. And we're sort of even harken back to what was a lot of things we were prototyping in those days. But I think that share a little bit about how you think about, or how you were thinking about at that time,
Hmm.
our space in higher ed and building a community within it. Just thinking
Yeah.
about using Higher Ed Live and Ed Universe and as a content hub and bringing in contributors for the thought partnerships. But what were you thinking back in the day? I realized there was a business objective for
Of
M
course.
Stoner and awareness and getting people to be clients there. But this was unique back in those days.
Of course, there was a business objective, right? Because there is a real business that has a real bottom line. Um, but it was mission critical to the company to give back to the industry. And Michael Stoner is one of the pioneers of thought leadership in our industry. Um, so these were efforts, of course, at the end of the day, to get the M Stoner name out there and build our brand awareness. But I think that they worked because the people behind them deeply cared about all the other objectives around raising our industry up and creating a space and a community for the people who are raising the industry up and have really important things to say. And you have to remember, Ryan, this was in 2010, 2011, 2012. So social media is still kind of new on the scene. Like higher ed Twitter was popping off on the daily,
Yeah.
and people were craving online communities, but Slack didn't exist yet. LinkedIn wasn't quite where, it's not the LinkedIn that we know today. Um,
No.
so we created a digital space for people to come to. And I think that's why, in early days, like that's why it worked, because there frankly weren't a lot of those spaces for senior marketing communication professionals in our industry to collaborate outside of the industry events. And what's really interesting to think about is in 2026, I mean,
Is there
that's
more? Is it
actually still
better?
kind of true. No, I mean,
I
like,
was gonna say you were thinking the same thing I was. Is
yeah,
it better now?
it kind of like it is and it isn't. Like, I run a MarComm Barbie group for women in our industry. So hey, ladies, if you're not in
What
it,
does that
DM
mean,
me. I'll
Marcom
get you
Barbie
in it.
group? Yeah, yeah. What is that?
What does that mean? All right.
Yeah.
So the origin story. A few years back at AMA in Chicago, Josie Alquist and I threw a Barbie party. This was the year of the Barbie movie. Okay. So everybody's like obsessed with Barbie back then, like we're all obsessed with Wicked right now. And the Sunday night after the opening reception, we were like, we got to throw a party for the ladies. And we had no objective other than like, we wanted to throw a party for the ladies. And I was very fortunate that my employer at the time, Element 451, was willing to sponsor that event and just essentially fund, 50 women like drinking sparkly pink cocktails and like showing up in full on like hot pink onesies. So, it morphed into a Slack channel that is like
Okay.
thriving. We've got hundreds of people in the Slack channel, some who have never been to an AMA in their life, and some who are, at our like informal meetups every year, right? So there you go. There is one example of a community space that is thriving right now in this industry. But it's so interesting that we're pulling this thread because this is literally like, what am I doing today? I am consulting with companies and trying to convince them that community is where it's at, because I have built my entire career on building communities at the companies that I've been in. And I have watched it work over and over and over again when you have this special sauce of people who deeply care about the mission of the industry and helping move it forward, combined with the resources that it takes, because it does take resources to build and execute, an ongoing community. You put those two things together and the business actually wins every single time. Why aren't more people doing it? Ryan, your guess is as good as mine.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, I see the opportunity and I'm passionate about the space as well as you are. I see a great, the chance to build and bring together and establish a community with a professional set of resources and conversations and thought leadership. It's all there still. But I have to say, like at least the advancement space is a graveyard of failed
Mm.
communities.
Oh.
Network platforms and various types of groups. I mean, the reason LinkedIn is different today than it was 15 years ago is all of those groups failed.
Hmm.
Like they're not present anymore. LinkedIn's so like, you know what, we're not going to worry about those algorithms around those groups anymore and show that content. And so what do you think is the most important ingredient or ingredients that go into community building, effective
Mm.
community building?
Discipline. Because as you're describing all these LinkedIn groups that failed, is that LinkedIn's fault? Or is it the
Yeah.
people who are running those groups, right?
Yeah.
Not
Definitely
having the
the people running the
discipline.
groups for sure.
Right. Right. Because something tells me, as somebody who runs a LinkedIn group that's doing pretty well, if you have the discipline, right? And this isn't just for community building. I think this is just true for doing great work as a professional. And oh my gosh, this is like what I learned on that dairy farm. If you have the discipline to wake up every morning and do the thing that you know you need to do and not procrastinate on it, like that's 50% of it right there. And when I have recently been giving a keynote talk around the 10 different types of innovation, um, I come back to this point time and time again. Innovation doesn't fail because of a lack of good ideas. Innovation stalls or fails because of the process barriers, the resource barriers, and a lot of times just the discipline to do the thing. And I so to answer your question, it's the same. I think it's the same challenges. Like we put too much red tape in our way, um, and we wind up like self-sabotaging in the process.
Yeah. The grind, right? I mean, it's discipline, but it is, a grind. And I think, at least in the advancement engagement space, there's that push for results today, and engagement immediately. And that's not how you build communities. Communities are built slow and steady, wins the race,
Yeah.
featuring the people who are your early adopters and, being disciplined day after day, week after week. You
We
mentioned
can't
your
like
key.
apply performance marketing metrics to things that build brand awareness. And I think that's like this trap that we are in right now where we can measure everything and AI only helps us measure things better and faster and, review data, at a speed at which or correlate data at a speed at which we could never do before as just mere humans. And so I think or not, I know I have watched this shift over the last handful of years. Um, uh, Performance marketing, whether it's just literally like surviving the budget cut, right? If we can attribute ROI and these, all these open rates, click rates, et cetera, to um to anything we're doing as marketers, then that wins. But community building, brand building, raising awareness, you can't apply the same metrics. And so it's a challenge. It's a challenge that we have.
It definitely is. You wrote a recent article and you were talking about how marketing and communications units, who are principally tasked with, yes, brand awareness, but also enrollment, retention, are carrying institutional survival. Share a little bit
Mhm.
about what you meant by that.
Yeah, sure. So that was within the context of that 10 types of innovation talk. And, MarComm sits at the intersection of every type of innovation that touches the external world. And so without going into all 10 types, right? Usually when we think of innovation, we're thinking about product innovation, the things we see on Shark Tank, the better mousetrap. But the reality is, if we're only thinking about those two types of innovation, we are leaving 8 other types on the table: network innovation, process innovation, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and there is enormous leverage and enormous responsibility in those other types. And again, marketing sits at the intersection of all of the types that touch the external world. And so, therefore, I do believe they are carrying institutional survival because they control brand innovation, right? MarCom tends to determine whether an institution is believed, not just known. They control channel innovation, determining who can find you and how in a market that we know is actively shrinking. Marketing and communications build customer engagement systems like we have been talking about. That is a form of innovation, which can turn, an admitted student into a lifelong donor or not. They can see the service gaps before anybody else can within the institution. Another innovation type. So they can see the friction in various processes of the customer journey, and they build the network relationships. So that is yet again another innovation type. And while they might not be responsible for like signing the dotted line, they're the ones that when an employer relationship, alumni relationship, community partner relationships, right, they tend to be touching, if not directly managing those types of activities. So like every one of those 5 innovation types builds trust in some form or fashion, impacts the brand, impacts how the school shows up publicly. And so therefore, like, right, if roughly half of the institutional categories in higher ed are contracting, right, enrollment declines, demographic cliff, the rising public skepticism about the value of a degree. There's just generally overall distrust in higher education in this country in general. Like in that environment, the functions that are shaping how an institution is perceived and positioned really freaking matters. Like those are the survival functions. And MarComm's the one team whose job literally shapes everything from perception to trust building to making the institution like believable to the outside world.
When the marketing teams that you work with are struggling to innovate, they might want to, right? They might understand the concepts you're bringing to the table, but they're on the struggle bus. What's usually going on there that prevents clients that you work with, or maybe just in general, marketing and communications teams from reaching sort of the objectives that you might suggest for innovation?
Yeah. There's usually 3 reasons for failure. The first is that innovation becomes episodic. And so it just gets treated as an event or it's a rebrand, right? How often do we rebrand our institutions? It's a new initiative, it's a task force. Like it's this thing that has a launch moment and the momentum builds up to it, but then it dissolves after that launch moment and nobody really owns what comes after it. So that can often be one of the failure modes. Another is that the innovation's performative. So the innovation lab or the task force or whatever gets spun up, but they don't actually have budget authority, or the strategic plan doesn't have any operational tether to it. And then the
Yeah.
third is that the innovation is actually just invisible because the work isn't compounding and it has no connection to each other. So really, and we call this silos, right? Like, and we all know those exist on campuses because work's happening in 5 different units, but it's not compounding on each other. It's not connected to each other, and it just multiplies the effort of us humans versus like building something that's more enduring.
Yeah. Do you think that MarComm is being asked to solve problems it shouldn't be in these circumstances?
Yeah, I think that definitively yes. Retention problems, for example, are actually advising curriculum and student success problems, but a lot of times marketing has to carry the retention number. Brand perception problems are sometimes product truth problems, and you can't rebrand your way out of a crappy student experience. And maybe a third is just trust erosion in general. And that's less about marketing and more about, again, back to the experience and in some cases operations. And like MarCom cannot fix a broken experience, but oftentimes MarCom's the only function with the data to see that the experience is broken. And so then, the job isn't to like, the job becomes, the job should be to surface it, but more often than not, the CMO gets blamed because they can't fix it.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of an assessment on external communication, specifically looking at alumni and donor communications. But I've had a chance to interview several staff members and faculty, academic deans, and one of the things that I've noticed is that oftentimes there's a breakdown with respect to resources that are available in MarComm, and then they say, you know what, we just cannot handle you and your needs in athletics, you and your needs in the colleges and schools. We've got to be focused in this environment on enrollment. We've got to be focused on, brand and identity. And so you go ahead and you do your things over there. And then what happens is over the course of time, right, there is a disconnect with everybody doing their own communications and
Right.
everybody trying to figure out how to get back on the same page because they've gotten so far off of it.
Yeah.
Is that a common thing that you witness or talk about and or have any prescriptions for?
I don't know that I have prescriptions for it other than give your marketing team better resources so they
Yeah, I
don't have
mean,
to
that's
say
it pretty
no
much comes
all the
down to that,
time.
doesn't it? You've got to actually spend the money on having the people centrally.
Right, right, and
Yeah.
create the communication channels and the trust channels so that, that so that people don't get so far off base. But yeah, I mean, what you are describing, do I hear that from others who work on campuses? Like, yes, absolutely. And it's only amplified when those campus, like, it seems to be directly correlated to how many students are being served because smaller institutions are smaller.
Yeah.
There's less people to have to necessarily worry about. You get to a huge institution of 50,000 plus students. Well, now you're, just you've ballooned your staff size. And so, yeah, there's a lot of good like use cases on our own campuses for like maybe our business students to go and solve.
Yeah, examine the processes and get
Yeah.
some applied learning experience.
Hmm.
So, meeting this current moment, 2026, 6 years post-pandemic, lots of things are different now than they were back when you and I were working on Ed Universe or Higher Ed Live, and even just a few years ago, like, things are incredibly different than they were. What do you think's changed the most about marketing and communications in higher ed that you think more schools should be thinking about right now?
Yeah. Um, you're talking about change, and I think that's the first answer to the question. Like the speed of change is real, especially in this AI world that we now live in 2026, and that speed is outpacing the structure of the function. On my Higher Ed Pulse podcast about a month or so ago, one of my guests actually celebrated how slow moving our institutions are and said that they should be slow moving, and that made me really think about things differently. And he had a really good point around that, that the institution can be the steady force, right, in this sea of change. But I don't think that negates the fact that, the org chart, the budget, and the way that we are structured haven't quite caught up to the fact that like AI alone can do what a 5-person team used to be able to produce, in the course of a week. So I think
Yeah.
speed of change is one. Fragmented audience is another. Like there's no single journey. And I guess I don't know that that's necessarily different than it was 15 years ago, but it's more fragmented than it was. So you don't have single channels, you don't have single journeys. You've got a ninth grader walking down their hallway, seeing an ad for your institution on the screen in their school. Later that night, finding out their cousin, who's 4 years older, got accepted at this other institution they never heard of, right? They're getting these inputs from so many different places, and it's such a long, windy road to the MarComm and enrollment efforts of an institution to an actual button seat. Um, and the CMO role, I think, is also another really big change. Like, it's actually starting to exist as a strategic seat within the organization, sometimes in some institutions, it's still got weird reporting lines. It's not directly on the cabinet or the president. And the latest Simpson Scarborough research this year, like they've been doing their annual CMO report, and yet again, the resourcing is a continued concern. And it feels like CMOs are just playing this losing game for all the things that we've been talking about over the
Yeah.
course of this conversation.
Well, it's really interesting too, the way when I interact with advancement units and there are different alignments within those units, sometimes there's a dedicated advancement team embedded within the central MarComm unit. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes advancement has its own dedicated marketing communications unit. One of the things I notice is that if the unit is embedded in MarComm and their job is to be focused on philanthropy and engagement from that external audience, that the mission creep towards enrollment and retention sort of happens naturally. There's
Right.
so much emphasis on enrollment. When you interact with your clients or think about what's the right approach for MarCom to have in its efforts to help the school raise philanthropic funds, like what do you see
Yeah.
some of the best schools doing? Or,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, tough, sort of slightly different question than the enrollment angle. Like, there's a real struggle, like it's a
yeah.
really important revenue source, and alumni can be impactful across not just
Yeah.
philanthropy, but enrollment and retention. And it just seems such an under-leveraged population to help solve all the university's problems. But I have some
Yeah.
biases, of course, from what I do here. But
Yeah. Well,
um,
and like that Simpson Scarborough research that I mentioned, has a stat in it only say it's like a 6% stat of like where funding and resources go. And it's 6% to advancement and then
yeah.
94% to everything else. But part of my questions for them when I chatted with them was like, there are kind of two primary revenue drivers at an institution. And it seems like one of them is getting 94% of the resources and the other is getting 6% of the resources. And that just does not compute in my head. Like,
Yeah.
how do we expect advancement to engage, raise dollars and engage alumni in a meaningful way if they are even more poorly under resourced than our central Marcom teams?
Yeah. It's really an interesting and struggle because so much of engagement is digital now, and
Yes.
so much relies on effective communications. You think about the average alumni leader, they have some level of control over the types of events they're having and the types of volunteers that exist and those programs, but what they have much less control over is the communications and marketing infrastructure to get people to show up, to get people to participate. And without directly, managing those resources, it's a very difficult thing to try to figure out and to pull those resources towards those projects and programs. But all right, back to our scaffolding here. Talk to me a little bit about what you think every college president should understand about their marketing and communications team.
Ooh, well, if any presidents are listening, um, I think that the marketing team's like the canary in the coal mine. Like they're going to see the perception problem before anybody else because they're the team that's closest to the audience. They're going to be able to tell you if something's off with how the institution is being received, maybe even before the measurable data catches up. But they can't shape the room or like they can't shape the message if they're not in the room, you know? And so like promoting someone into the CMO role shouldn't just be about optics. It needs to be about making sure that the person has a seat when the strategy is being set. I would hope that presidents can understand that activity is not performance. And so please stop asking your CMO how many posts or emails or campaigns they did and start asking what changed and how the institution is being understood and what trust is being built and what students are moving closer and faster to a yes, right? Get that average sales cycle down. And if you want your marketing team to behave like the strategic function that they should be, put them at the strategy table. Like, it's just not that complicated.
Makes sense to me. What do you think is the biggest disconnect between expectation and reality then? You mentioned the performative metrics. I suppose it kind of lives in that space.
Yeah. I think presidents are often expect MarComm to drive enrollment when the reality is that MarComm can amplify strong value propositions, but it can't manufacture them. And so when that experience does not line up to the reality, like the marketing team can only do so much with that. To differentiate the institution, again, it is not about a new brand and a fun new drone video on the website. Like, the differentiation work needs to start with the academic portfolio and the actual lived experience on the ground. The tagline comes 20 steps later. Um,
Yeah.
and and I think that a big reason for some of these disconnects is because people expect marketing to move very quickly, and that's only amplified again in this AI world where we can move a little bit faster. But like reality, marketing is moving fast. They're moving at 110% capacity, um, all the time. And oftentimes we just add and add and add. And I would plead to the presidents listening, like the first move when it comes to true innovation is subtraction, not just addition.
I think that's a higher ed problem in
Oof,
general.
yes.
Is it's always addition and it's never subtraction. This is a problem apparently across the organization. But, thinking about how marketing and communication and its role in driving engagement, I guess we're talking about the enrollment pipeline, the funnel, and
Hmm.
activating those young people to apply, to take an action. Is this the responsibility of the marketing communications team? Is this the responsibility of admissions? Where are the lines blurred here between communications and engagement?
Hmm. Communication is a function that is going to shape and distribute messages, right? So think voice, the institution's positioning, the channels institutions communicating through, the content that is being used. Engagement is the sum of every interaction that any individual has with the school. So communications is an input to engagement, but so is the counselor's phone call and the website's load time and the tone of the person who answers the phone in the financial aid office and how quickly a faculty member responds to their email, right? So all of those things are under the umbrella of engagement. But the lines get blurry because engagement is often measured with the same metrics that look like communication metrics, things
Right.
like open rates and click rates, right? So the things that are measuring communication performance do not measure if a student feels seen, known, understood, right? The face, not the number. Um, so yes, there are really blurry lines here, but we need to distinguish that communications is what you send, engagement is what they feel. And when we get too blurry, that's how our universities end up with really great email open rates and really bad yield rates.
And is the intersection there applications? I mean, is there, I suppose marketing communications is there to help drive conversions, right?
Hmm.
Of people filling out forms. Is that a misconception that that's part of the role of marketing communications?
Well, I think it's, I think those things are squarely in the function of admissions and enrollment. Marketing doesn't control the application portal or the CRM notes from the counselor. Um, but there's, if that's getting blurry, then that's a governance problem. And
Yeah.
you're asking a team to be accountable for like outcomes it just doesn't touch.
Do you think that MarComm is typically asked to drive engagement without the capability of owning the experience? And if should this look different if you were changing things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that any good marketing team is partnering with their sales team. And we don't always like to talk about admissions and enrollment functions as the sales teams, but like, in my world, working with agencies and ed tech companies, as a CMO or a CRO, like I'm always trying to make sure that there's a constant like interweaving of and feedback loop of what marketing and sales are doing. If you want marketing to fully own engagement, particularly in the college search process, like you need to give them the keys to that experience. But oftentimes those things are just sitting in two very different units.
Yeah. So the answer to this next question is almost certainly no. Communications cannot fix a broken experience.
No, correct. If there's a takeaway from our chat today, there it is.
The sales team is interesting. The way in my head I think about it, at schools that struggle to enroll, it's sales. At schools that don't, it's admissions. But maybe that's not right. It's just kind of how I shorthand it.
Hmm.
What do you think
Say
about
that
that?
again.
At schools that struggle to enroll, to meet their enrollment numbers, it's sales. The focus needs to be sales. But at schools that do not, where there's far more applicants than spaces, it's admissions.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Dartmouth certainly
Dartmouth,
doesn't have a
good
sales problem,
example. They do
right?
not have a sales problem. Yeah.
Um, the small private liberal arts school that's at risk of, shutting down next year. Well,
And
they've got a lot of problems,
they got a lot of
but
problems.
they might have a sales problem.
They got to figure out the sales problem too.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I feel like it's when it's a challenge to secure those classes, the tactics around the experience are that much more important, and
yeah,
the alignment between marketing, communications, enrollment, advancement, everything just has to be so much tighter to connect all the dots and utilize all of these resources. I often is the case, you have an alumni leader or advancement leaders where that's told by the president, listen, you don't need to help with enrollment as well. You cannot be over here just focused on philanthropy, because
right.
philanthropy is probably not going to be solving our problem if we can't meet our enrollment. And you've got to figure out how to deploy alumni as part of the experience. And
Hmm.
it's not easy. All right, last few minutes here, Mallory. I want to have a little bit of a quick fire.
I
Here's
love
a
it.
finish the sentence quick fire. MarComm is most effective when?
Ooh, when it's measured on what changed, not on what shipped.
What changed, not on what shipped, meaning the content that was published. Is that what you mean by
The
shipped?
impact that it has, not the volume of emails and campaigns and tweets or whatever it is today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. All right, so request from a campus partner that is most likely to get an eye roll from the marketing communications team.
I've got one in your lane. Um, can we get this in the next alumni magazine? Said 2 days before the magazine prints.
Ugh, yeah.
I heard that one a lot when I was on a campus. Or, oh, but the dean just has some edits. Can you just plug them in?
By
Right.
the way, what's your view on the importance of alumni magazines?
Love my alumni magazines. All right, I'm just speaking from my my undergrad and graduate. I get those alumni magazines in the mail and I care. I look at them. They sit on the coffee table for at least a couple weeks. Maybe I'm the outlier. I don't know, but I like genuinely read them because I want the updates and the stories, and that is one of the primary vehicles for which I get that news. So
Do
I
they
do
help
love them.
enroll or retain students?
Well, um, are they some component in the long and windy road of brand awareness? Perhaps. Is there a student out there who walked into their uncle's home and saw their uncle's alumni magazine sitting on a table and maybe picked it up and in their subconscious had a, you know, a little like brand recognition moment there? Perhaps. Would anybody in their right mind ever connect an alumni magazine to a butt in a seat? I don't think so, but I think it's because it's very hard to correlate that. Like I just don't simply know that it's measurable.
If your alma mater stopped sending you the magazine, would you stop giving?
I would be sad. Um, no, I would not stop giving though. But I
Yeah,
would be sad because I do look forward to it.
fair enough. All right, something MarComm teams should say no to more often.
The one-off campaigns that are not tied to measurable business outcomes. Like if you cannot name what changes if the campaign ultimately works, why are we wasting our time and resources?
I like it. 5 years. In 5 years, what will MarComm will, excuse me, in 5 years, MarComm will look more like blank.
Ooh, this one's tough because it's like predicting what's going to happen with AI,
I know.
before like just in the last year, it's impossible to predict. But yeah, I do think that in 5 years, um, marketing teams are going to be more senior and they will be augmented with AI for production. And so hopefully that means freeing humans up to do the strategy work, the positioning work, the relationship building work. But I do think we are going to see, some of those more entry level positions get replaced.
Yeah. All right. Well, tell listeners a little bit about your workshop initiative, the Upstate initiative that is on your hat.
Yes, literally on my head. So Let's Go Upstate is a retreat that is held in Saratoga Springs. We are actively accepting applicants and sponsors for the fall cohort, which will be in September. You can go to letsgoupstate.com to learn a little bit more. But this is a highly curated experience born out of Ashley Budd and myself having met at a conference many moons ago. She was involved in Higher Ed Live as well, of course. We
Kind of
have
a
been going to
legend, you
conferences
know?
together for, she is a legend.
Yeah.
Uh, we've been going to conferences together for a really long time, Ryan. And traveling with each other to these
You guys
conferences
shared
and
like a
hanging out
shared
with
office
each other at
space
these
too, right? You
conferences.
live
And
close by each other in Saratoga.
we did.
Oh, you did.
We
Maybe not
did.
anymore.
I mean,
Yeah.
she lives half a mile away from me, but
Okay.
we did have a shared co-working space together. Um, so, like, what happens when you go to these conferences? You get, you're up early, you're staying awake really late. There's not a lot of time to exercise if that's an important part of your routine. The food's typically terrible. And you're just getting shuttled from one track session to the next. And I think that at some point in our careers, we realized that we were not learning very much in the actual sessions, and we were learning so much more in the moments and spaces in between the sessions and the conversations that we were having and the networking that was happening. You get that nightcap with somebody and you wind up on this tangent and this conversation that winds up maybe changing your career. So why not build an experience around the in-between moments and actually give executive leaders in higher ed a beautiful space to come to, a moment to pause, a moment to just connect with other like-minded individuals, and build an entire program around wellness, around experience, around conversation. We don't take that time for ourselves, and this is why we have the random 2 a.m. thoughts or the shower thoughts, right? How many times have you been on team? It's like, I was in the shower and I had this idea. Well, it's because you're not staring at a screen and you're actually giving yourself some space to think. So we have crafted this really amazing retreat experience where attendees do not have to pay a dime to come. They just have to physically get themselves here because we have been so fortunate to work with partners that understand how important everything I just said is. And yeah, the first one's coming up the beginning of May. And the second one's happening in September. And if listeners are interested, letsgoupstate.com is where they can learn more.
So cool. I love it. Solving for the optimum conference experience, keeping it going, making it valuable, I think is an important initiative. So kudos to you and
Yeah,
Ashley
thank
for
you.
tackling that. Mallory, if someone wanted to find you, work with you, figure out how you think about stuff, where would they look for you?
The best place is to just go to MalloryWillsea.com, 2 L's in Mallory and Willsea. Of course, LinkedIn too. Would love to connect there if you're looking to hit up my DMs. But you can learn more about me and my speaking engagements on my website, as well as the consulting work I'm doing. I primarily work with the tech companies, agencies, and other organizations that need clear strategy, stronger positioning, and content operations. My perspective is that community building is important, that your market presence shapes how you will show up for this industry and be, like, known, and trusted. And don't we all want to work with people who we like, know, and trust? So there's ways to do that. And I hope companies kind of figure it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your commentary. I learned a lot from you. I know others have too for the last 15 years anyway. Maybe it's been longer that you've been in our space, but I'm grateful
Thanks,
for your
Ryan.
time today. Thanks for being on the keynote.
I appreciate you. This was great. So much fun and really nice to reconnect with you.